Alright, this is part 3 of chapter 3. We're going to be animating a ball bounce today. We're going to go through the checklist to make sure the rig's ready to go before we get started. So I'm going to go to my ball rig. Everything's zeroed out. I'm going to expand. Next I have my translate handle. Everything is zeroed out. Oh, it's not locked though. So let me go in and lock it. I'll lock everything but translate. Alright. Here's my rotate handle. I must have forgotten to lock these, so no big deal. I can lock them now. Everything's zeroed out. And let's go to my scale handle. And let's lock everything but scale. And finally, my ball. We'll just lock everything out on that. Make a quick save. There we go. So to really see this ball rotate and bounce, I'm going to go ahead and put a checkerboard material on it, just so I can see the ball's rotation. Kind of hard to see a ball rotating when it's completely spherical. So I'm going to go to the Hypershade, Window, Rendering Editors, Hypershade, right here. And I'm just going to quickly click on Lambert right here. Double click my Lambert in the Hypershade window. Lambert 2 comes up. We'll call this ball underscore matte. And we'll just go to color right here. And I'm going to click on this checkerboard picture right here, not because we want checkerboard, but because this checkerboard brings up our render node menu. Now we select checker. Alright, let me go back to my Hypershade. I'm going to middle mouse click right here, middle mouse click and hold, and just drag it onto my ball. Oh wait, where's my checkerboard? Well, I need to press 6 on the keyboard, and now I can see my checkerboard come up. So 4 is wireframe, 5 is gray shaded mode, 6 is texture mode. Alright, great. So I have my ball ready to rock and roll. So let's do something with this ball. Let's have it bounce like this. Boing, 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 boing. So I want to have it going in a direction. Okay? So I'm going to pick a good starting position. Maybe have it come out to right there. I don't want to animate it in the X direction, the left or right direction here. I just want it going from forward to back. So here we go. Alright, great. So I think this will be a good place to have my ball. I'm not going to do a high bounce for this. Maybe right there. And I'm going to go ahead and set my keyframe for my translate. I'm going to make a keyframe there. I'm going to grab my rotation handle, and I'm going to make a keyframe for it as well. I'm going to go ahead and grab my scale handle, and I'm going to set a keyframe for it as well. So I have 3 keyframes for each of my 3 handles. So one for my translate, one for my rotate, and one for my scale. Alright, let me lock that object layer down. So what I want to do now is I just want to worry about my translate. I'm not going to worry about my rotate or scale right now. I'm just going to worry about how this ball bounces. So I want to do a pose to pose type animation. And I'm going to go to my side view camera. So all I'm looking at it is from the side, so I can exactly see how it's bouncing. So let's go to about 10, and I want it to hit here. So it goes boom. And I'm going to show you a little trick. If I want my bounce to be half as much each time it bounces, what I can do is I can scrub on my slider, and I can go to 5 or 6 here. And if my time slider is at 5 or 6, I'm halfway between my initial keyframe and my landing keyframe. So if I'm at 5, I'm halfway in between those 2 heights. What I can do now is I can middle mouse click and drag on my time slider. Notice how the ball doesn't shift position anymore. And I'll go a little bit less time. I don't want a full 10 seconds. And I can just move it over now. So now it goes boom, boom, half the distance. And I want to kind of shorten the time each time it lands. So on this frame 21, we'll do something like this. So halfway between. kind of want to be over here. Boom, boom. mm, mm. Alright, let's have it land. Maybe make it bounce a little bit lower. And we're going to have kind of like a... Maybe it's going a little too fast. We can fix it on the dope sheet if we want, though. I'm just kind of planning out my bounces. The graph editor is going to come in really handy here in a second. See how it gets faster there at the end? That's probably not a good idea. We want it to get slower. Alright. And then maybe have one more little bounce. Like it's barely able to keep bouncing. And then maybe have it settle finally. Alright, so we got some problems here. Mainly in my timing. So let's look at my graph editor now and see what the curves can tell me. So with my translate handle selected, I go to Window, Animation Editors, Graph Editor. Alright, and we have two main curves we're looking at. My translate Y and my translate Z. Basically, I want to kind of start spreading out my curve a little bit. It's a little too fast here. So I'm just going to grab these points, move them a little bit, really start spacing it out a little bit. As I move them to the left like this, I'm actually increasing the time on the time slider in between hops. Alright. Alright, I can already tell my translate Z is a little weird. I want this to be not so varied. I'm going to kind of come in here and get out some of the irregularities out of this. I don't want my curve to go so steep. I kind of want it to go really curve out and peak out. So what I can do, I can just start raising the curve like this, so it's not so much of a drastic curve. I just want to mellow it out. Okay. As you can see, my time slider's gotten a little bit messy. Okay. But as you can see, the little work I did, we're getting a little bit better. Now let's start eyeing it. I think it scoots too much that way. So let's move it on back. Let's delete some keyframes here, just to clean things up. I want to delete some keyframes. I got a little messy here. Alright, don't be afraid to go back and delete keyframes. So we don't want the ball just to come to a dead stop. That's what happens when we delete the keyframes. Boom, 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 boom. See what that looks like. Oh, that's not too bad. Alright. So I think I got my basic translation down. You know what? At the end, I think it still has a little bit too much energy when it comes up. So I'm going to bring it back a little bit. Bring it back just a little bit. So I want that last bounce to be like, I'm done. I think I could even add one more bounce. I think it comes down to a sudden stop too much. Barely bounce. Just barely a bounce there. I'm going to slide this over. I don't think I gave it enough keyframes there. See what that little last bounce did for me. Oh, maybe not. It's like, I'm about to stop. No, I'm not. mm, mm. So I just need to shorten the distance between these keyframes up here. Delete it, and I'll really hone in on it. I think I'm just moving too much. I'm just barely going to move. Really subtle stuff at this point. Let's see what happens. It's like a little hesitation there. Let me move these keyframes a little bit closer together. The timing's a little off. There we go. I think we can live with that. Bam, 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 bam. There we go. All right, great. So now we have to worry about rotation. Okay. Or you want to do, we'll do squash and stretch first. Let's see what that does. So let's do our squash and stretch. Every time this ball hits, it's going to squish up, and then every time it jumps up, it's going to kind of get longer. So let's just eye it here. Let's bring up our scale tools. So right here, so if as the ball's falling, we see right here it hits the ground. The frame right before it, though, the ball stays the same size. So we need to put a keyframe here to make sure the ball stays the same size from frame 1 to 9, because it hasn't hit anything yet. So it's going to maintain size. But at frame 10, we're going to squash it just like this. Alright. And we're going to adjust our translation like so. So when it hits, see how it goes like that? It squishes up. And then right after our squash, we're going to go maybe to frame 2. We're going to have it elongate a little bit. Boing. But at the height of our jump, we want our ball to be back at the original mass. So let's determine the height of our jump. We can do that by grabbing our translate handle. At frame 16, it should be the same scale it always was. So I know from frames 1 to 9, it's the original scale. So I'm going to go anywhere between these, and my ball is at the same scale. And I'm going to middle mouse click and drag to frame 16. Notice how the ball hasn't moved or anything. And I'm going to keyframe this. What this is going to do is, I'm going to get my squash and stretch. And by the time frame 16 occurs, it's going to morph back to its original shape. So it's basically the little pattern we're going to do from here on out. So determine where the ball hits. So it hits right here. Back up a frame and maintain this volume. So we're going to make a keyframe at 20, because between keyframe 16 and 20, the ball is the same shape. As soon as it hits, though, that's when we scrunch it up a little bit. And what we'll do, when we make a keyframe for that squash, and then we'll go into my translate and then adjust for that. So I'm going to bring it down. So it squishes again. Let me give it a little bit. That'll be enough squash and stretch. I don't want it to get too, yeah, well, okay, I'll exaggerate it just a little bit. So let me squish it a little bit more. To keep in mind, though, your first squash, that the first time it lands, should be the most exaggerated. And each time it squashes after that, it should get less and less squash. Because remember, the energy is dissipating, and so the factors that are making it squash are slowly running out as the ball settles down. So your first squish should be the most severe, and then they should get a little bit more subtle after that. I mean, by this point, there probably won't be hardly any squash and stretch. So let's say about a frame after this one, then I'm going to have it maybe after the, maybe when it gets to right here. I'm going to have it elongate, boing, boing, and then the height of the jump is at frame 26. So I'm going to go back to frame 5 or 1, middle mouse click and drag to frame 26, hit S, and it'll keyframe it to go back to the same scale. We're going to use that frame 1 as our original template scale for the ball throughout this whole animation. And then it lands right here. So let's preserve our scale mass right before it lands. Let's squash it just a little bit. Okay, let me hit my keyframe. Let me adjust my translation so it actually hits the ground. Alright. And then as it bounces up, get a little bit of elongation. The peak keyframe is 33. I'll go back to frame 1, middle mouse click and drag to 33. And as you can see, my squash and stretch is not being exaggerated as much anymore because the ball has less energy to bounce. Okay, so it lands again right here. I'll preserve the mass. So I make a keyframe right before it lands. So these frames right here preserve the original mass of the ball. As the ball lands, I'll just do a little bit of scrunch. And just tweak it again. As soon as the ball goes up, I'm just going to elongate it just a little bit. Height of the jump is at 41. Scrub back to frame 1. Middle mouse click and drag to 41. Hit keyframe. So it scrunches back up to the original mass. Alright, and at this point, there's hardly going to be any squash and stretch. What I can do here, I can kind of play around with it. And I'll quit trying to preserve the mass so much because there won't be really enough keyframes there for that. So adjust there. I think I squashed it too much. And you can always see your values over here in your channel box. So if Y scale is at 111 is the natural size of this thing, at 0.95 or 0.97, there's barely any squash going on. And I really want to be subtle at this point. So that's perfect. Alright, let me go back down. Animate. Boing, boing, boing. So it's at the height of the jump here. So I'm going to elongate it real quick. Barely anything. And I want to land the last keyframe. I want it to be at its original mass. So it's 49 as the last keyframe. I go to 1. That's the original mass. Middle mouse click and drag all the way to 49. Keyframe the wrong handle there. So let me be on scale. I go to frame 49. And now we should have a really cool squash and stretch going on. Just watch it a few times. That squash and stretch gives it the illusion that this is like made out of jelly almost, right? Boing, 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 boing. And the more you exaggerate it, the more cartoon, more stylized the animation gets. So what are we going to do for our animation now? Or for our rotate? Well, let's grab our rotation handle. And what we want to do is, we just want to have this thing rotating in a forward angle all the way to frame 49. So we can just grab our rotation, and the only thing we have to do is make one keyframe at 49, and we just crank it up. See how I'm just rotating it? It's like negative 892 now. So let's see what happens. Hmm. Well, we have a problem because the rotation doesn't match up with this energy slowing down at all. So I wish there was a way where we could have a slow in or a slow out on this. Alright, so there's a way we can do that. Let's go to our great graph editor. It's my outliner. Here's my graph editor. And my rotate X is what I'm looking at here. I need this not to be so dramatic at first, probably. So let me just bring it up just a little bit. And what I want it to do, I want it to have a really nice slow down effect. So I'm going to adjust my curve. And I really want it to slow down at the end. Okay. Let me get my keyframes back where they need to be. So it should be spinning faster here. And if my computer could keep up. Come on, Maya. So we want the rotation to kind of peter out at the end. Let me move that back to frame 49. So it should get slower. And our curve is what's going to let us do that. So I really want to have this curve kind of get less severe towards the end there. So let me undo that. I'll grab this. So more severe up here, and then tapers out at the end. Okay. Didn't do what I wanted it to. So let's just adjust this time slider a little bit. And it's just a lot of tweaks. I'm going to shorten my visible so I can see this ball bounce more. Alright. Still something's a little off. Let's try this. Okay. Maybe I have too much rotation going, period. Let's adjust that. Well, be careful about grabbing your handles. So you see how I got the curve going steep and then it just goes. That's what I want. But I don't think it rotates enough now. So I need to go back to my graph editor. I just need to pull this last endpoint further down the value. So I'm going to hold shift. See? Look at my ball as I pull this down. If I hold shift, I can only go up and down. That's a nice little trick. So let's see what happens now. Okay, we're getting there. Oh, I don't have my rotation curve selected. Let me grab it. Alright. So I want this curve to be more severe here. So we'll do this. And we'll do that. Hopefully. Just playing with your curves. That's all it takes. There we go. I want my curve to be a sharp dive because it has a lot of energy here into a slowed out, gradual, horizontal, dead spin. There we go. And here we go. Nice. Alright, let's go back in and look at our squash and stretch though. We might have to, there we go, it's still squash and stretching. Alright, right here though, the squash and stretch gets a little off. Because right here, it hits, boing, it hits, it squashes and stretch. But look what happens whenever we did the scale before we did the rotate. Now the squash and stretch isn't stretching right. So let's grab it, let's go in here and see if we can fix it. So it hits right here. We almost need to make it squash like this a little bit too. There we go. I had to kind of squash it from this angle and this angle because look where it landed. It landed in between both handles, right? And then this one, I need to scale it like that probably. There we go. I think that does it. So let's look at it in close detail. So we have the raw ball rotating, squash and stretch, squash and stretch, squash and stretch, squash and stretch, and then comes down to an end, all while rotating forward. That would have been impossible to do if we were just animating on the ball. Awesome. Don't tell me that doesn't look like a real ball bouncing. I mean, it probably could use a little work, but for intents and purposes, the workflow is sound. I think I got too much squash and stretch at the end. He's really bouncy or squashy at the end. I think it comes from this one right here. So let me undo that a little bit. There we go. This one might be a little too severe too. So I'm looking at my values right here. I want it to be about 0.96. There we go. And that's it. Alright, so all we have left to do is the feather. Next lesson we'll learn how we can have a little finesse and a little style with our animation. This was fun. The brick was kind of simple. The feather will be more complex, but ultimately a little bit more organic, a little bit more fun. We'll see. Alright, thanks guys.